In our last lesson, we learnt about the role the French Revolution played in fostering and spreading the spirit of nationalism throughout France and then throughout Europe. Because it was this French Revolution that birthed the new ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity. Feudal privileges were put an end to, and the entire political social system in France was undergoing drastic changes. Now this was a time of major turbulence and trouble throughout France, because there was a lot of confusion. People were ruled by the French monarch for so many centuries, and suddenly there was a kind of political vacuum. Now this political vacuum opened up an opportunity for Napoleon Bonaparte. In fact, Napoleon Bonaparte was one of the greatest leaders, one of the greatest emperors that this world has ever witnessed. Now Napoleon Bonaparte came to power as the Emperor of France in 1804. And when Napoleon came to power as the Emperor of France, people now began to revere and hail him as the liberator, because they thought that Napoleon will be able to release them from the state of utmost confusion, chaos, anarchy and turmoil. They thought that Napoleon himself was an embodiment of the ideals of the French Revolution. In fact, Napoleon brought about many changes throughout France. When Napoleon was ruling as the Emperor of France, he controlled almost all the neighboring regions of France. He was immensely powerful and authoritarian. Now, over the years, as Napoleon kept on controlling and annexing more and more regions, and he tried to bring everything under the control of France, these regions, these places now saw Napoleon as an invading force. Because why would these regions want to be controlled by Napoleon? And they saw that Napoleon was moving forward like a power-hungry despotic tyrant. So, though the French Revolution put monarchy to an end in France, Napoleon was no different. He was ruling as a power-hungry emperor. But Napoleon as an emperor was very different from the erstwhile French monarchy, because Napoleon brought about many changes which have been very important in the pages of history. But as he was seen as an invading force, he was finally defeated in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. So he came to power as the Emperor of France in 1804, and it was in this Battle of Waterloo in 1815 that Napoleon was defeated. So just a while ago we mentioned this point that Napoleon had brought about many very important changes in France. Now in our last lesson we talked about how there was a lack of centralized administration, central laws in France prior to the French Revolution. In the old regime, the French Empire was divided into several feudal estates, and the feudal lords imposed their own taxes. They imposed their own laws in their feudal estates. And so there was no one single law, single administrative system to govern all the people in the empire. As a result of this, trade activities were disrupted. People found it very difficult to move freely between and among these feudal estates. But when Napoleon came to power as the Emperor of France, he had to prove to the masses that he was a real embodiment of the ideals of the French Revolution. He was the harbinger of change. This is the idea that he wanted the masses to believe in. And so Napoleon in the year 1804 had introduced a new code of civil laws, which was later known as the Napoleonic Code. Now, by civil laws, we understand a law book or a rule book, and the Napoleonic Code pertained to various kinds of things like taxes, revenue, family, property. So, it was for the first time that a proper codified law was introduced in the form of the Napoleonic Code in the year 1804. Before proceeding with this lesson, let me ask you a question. When was the Napoleonic Code introduced? Was it introduced in 1800, 1802, 1804 or in 1806? Well, the correct answer is 1804. It was in 1804 that Napoleon introduced the Napoleonic Code, which was a code of civil laws. Now, this Napoleonic Code brought about changes in the French society, because the ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity now took the shape of this Napoleonic Code. Because when Napoleon had introduced this Napoleonic Code, it was for the first time that the people of France had a set of laws to abide by. And this Napoleonic Code pertained to different things like family, property, revenue system, taxes, laws. So this Napoleonic Code was a very crucial thing to happen to France at this point of time. During the years of the French Revolution, the National Assembly did away with the feudal system. But feudal privileges still continued to exist in some form or the other. But it was the Napoleonic Code that did away with privileges completely, and then it established the revolutionary principle of equality before law. Here we see how every person is measured on the same scale before law. Law is blindfolded. Law will not discriminate among the various citizens. So earlier on, law in the French society was not equal. The members of the first and the second estates could exploit the third estate members, and the third estate members did not really have any way to address their grievances, to address how they were being exploited and tortured by the first and the second estate members. But it was for the first time that this principle of equality was realized in France. So can you understand how Napoleon was showing himself as the liberator of the masses? And it is for this reason that the masses hailed him as the harbinger of change, as the harbinger of progress, because the masses initially thought that Napoleon would be able to bring them out of the state of anarchy and chaos. Napoleon would be able to bring France a kind of political, social and cultural stability. During the old regime in the French Empire, the peasants were very badly exploited, because these peasants already constituted the poorer lot. They found it very difficult when crops failed. Because of bad harvests, it often became almost near impossible to them to pay the taxes. And then the feudal lords kept on imposing more and more taxes on them. So the feudal system, the estate system, completely exploited these poor people. But with Napoleon coming to power, he reduced taxes for the peasants. And the peasants were also afraid of feudal allegiances. So those feudal lords who used their feudal powers in order to exploit the peasants were no longer in power. So taxes were cut down for the peasants, and they also did not have to pay any revenue to the feudal lords any longer. The Napoleonic Code also aimed to realize principles like liberty, freedom of work and protection of private property. So by liberty, we mean that individuals are treated with dignity. They have the liberty. They can speak whatever they want without being repressed, without being tortured or exploited. So the Napoleonic Code ensured individual liberty. So there were certain civil rights which were ensured by the Napoleonic Code. At the same time, the Napoleonic Code also ensured that people now enjoyed the freedom to work. So they were not discriminated against in terms of the classes they belonged to. And last but not the least, it also provided protection to private property. A very crucial thing that this Napoleonic Code introduced was that laws were to be officially announced from this point of time. Earlier on in the old regime, whenever any law was enacted, it was never officially announced. And more often than not, it fell on the poorest lot, on the members of the third estates to pay very high taxes, to pay a lot of revenue to the feudal lords as well as to the monarch. And these laws were always secretively implemented so that the masses did not really get to know what was being imposed on them. But henceforth, with the introduction of the Napoleonic Code, any law which was to be realized was first to be officially announced, and it was to be made public before it was applied to all the citizens uniformly. So this is how the principle of equality, which was one of the very important and crucial ideals of the French Revolution, was being realized during the rule of Napoleon as the Emperor of France. Now, Napoleon also had to show himself that he was taking into account the well-being of the masses. Because when the masses started seeing him as just another despotic, power-hungry ruler, he had to prove himself. And so he undertook many construction works. He constructed roadways, waterways like canals, and major monuments. In fact, the famous Arc de Triomphe in Paris was constructed during the rule of Napoleon. So in this way, the masses were now seeing that changes had really arrived in France. So they were no longer being exploited, or they were no longer living in the darkness of the old regime. So this is an image of himself that Napoleon created through the various kinds of works he did. With the introduction of the Napoleonic Code, the equations had flipped in France. Earlier on, the king is the law was the principle in the land. So it was the king who held ultimate power and authority over the masses. And the king enjoyed the final say. The king was the law, so to speak. But henceforth, the king ceased to be the law. In fact, now the law became the king. So the laws that were first officially announced and made public before being uniformly implemented on all now became the new king of the land. So the equation of laws had completely flipped with the introduction of the Napoleonic Code in 1804. Now, this Napoleonic Code was the first modern legal code that was codified, which is why it is so important. Earlier on, laws were not written down. Laws were arbitrarily imposed on people. But codification means writing down of something. And the Napoleonic Code was written down. It was made official before the masses. So the masses knew the laws that they were to abide by. And Napoleon brought about many changes simply by the introduction of this Napoleonic Code. In the beginning of this lesson, we mentioned this point that many neighboring regions of France saw Napoleon as an invading force. But after that, our discussion focused on the changes that Napoleon had brought about in the French society. And we saw how positive, how progressive those changes were. But why was still Napoleon considered a power-hungry tyrant? Because when Napoleon was ruling as the Emperor of France from 1804, he tried to bring more and more regions under the control of the French Empire. In fact, the modern-day countries of Belgium, Italy, Switzerland, Netherlands, parts of Poland, Germany were brought under the control of the French Empire. And Napoleon directly or indirectly controlled over huge portions of Europe. This map shows you the regions which were either directly or indirectly under the control of the French Empire. Now the region shown in blue in this map shows you the extent of the French Empire. The regions that are marked in green show you the states under Napoleon's control, and these were Confederation of the Rhine, Italy, Naples, Spain. So all these places were under the control of the French Empire. In fact, parts of certain East European places were also under the control of the French Empire. Now there were many states that allied with Napoleon. Now why do you think did these states marked in lavender in this map ally with Napoleon? Because the ruler of these places like the Austrian Empire, Denmark, Norway, Prussia saw Napoleon was very powerful. They knew that they could not combat or challenge the power of Napoleon. So for their own well-being, for their own good, they chose to ally with Napoleon instead of going in war against him. So these states were allied with Napoleon. And then there were certain states which were against Napoleon, and these states were United Kingdom, Sweden, the Russian Empire, Sardinia, Sicily and Portugal. So this is how Europe roughly looked during the first half of the 19th century. So we can see how major regions throughout Europe were either directly or indirectly under the control of Napoleon. So this is how Napoleon kept on annexing so many regions to bring everything under the control of the French Empire. So much so that at one point of time, Europe was called Napoleon's Europe, and rightly so, because he was in power over so many places. And it is for this reason only that these states which were against Napoleon saw him as a despotic ruler, saw him as a power-hungry tyrant, because Napoleon was moving forward very fast with his imperial missions, with his aspirations to control as much as possible. When Napoleon was bringing so many places under his control, the Napoleonic Code played a very crucial role, because Napoleon unified the regions he conquered by establishing uniform administration through the Napoleonic Code. Now Napoleon had to do this in order to keep all these places under his control. If a uniform administration was implemented, then the masses would feel a sense of belonging or identity with that one region. And so it was this Napoleonic Code that established a whole lot of civil laws, a whole lot of civil codes that the masses were supposed to abide by. And this Napoleonic Code not just united these various regions that Napoleon controlled, but it also served as a model for the legal system of many European countries. So those European places which were initially under the control of Napoleon and later on broke free of this power continued to use the Napoleonic Code as a model for their legal systems. And in fact, the imprint, or rather the influence of the Napoleonic Code could still be witnessed in the legal systems of many European countries. When Napoleon came to power and kept on controlling more and more regions, he had to strengthen his authority. He also had to ensure that the masses did not begin to rebel against him. He had already learned from the French Revolution that the masses could hold immense power in the land if they wanted to do so. And so Napoleon now started strengthening his army. Now Napoleon's armies, or Napoleon's troops, were to ensure that all these various regions, all the people living in those regions remained under the control of Napoleon. At the same time, Napoleon's troops were also tasked to spread the ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity in the newly occupied regions. So it were Napoleon's troops who kept on spreading these ideas. So the masses who lived in those regions which were controlled by Napoleon were now infused with the ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity. The spread of the ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity in the French-controlled regions had a repercussion as well. Now, people living in French-controlled countries like Holland, Switzerland, or even in cities like Mainz, Brussels, Warsaw, saw Napoleon as the harbinger of change. They were inspired by these ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity. But over the years, they saw that Napoleon did not really take into account their interests. All he had in mind was expansion of his territories. And so these people who were already introduced to these ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity now started seeing Napoleon as an invader. And so they were now inspired and they wanted to prevent and stop French military occupation in their lands. So this entire idea of spreading liberty, equality and fraternity among the masses to hold together actually backfired on Napoleon. Napoleon was no longer able to hold these people in the controlled regions together because they already knew what the test of freedom could be like. So these people now started looking for ways to defeat Napoleon. And defeated he was, despite being a very powerful military commander, despite being one of the most powerful emperors this world has ever seen. And it was in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815 that Napoleon was defeated. After the fall of Napoleon, these newly united people led their own nationalistic fights for the formation of their independent nations. So they were already initiated to the ideas of liberty, equality and fraternity. Nationalistic sentiments also surged in their minds. They felt a kind of belongingness, a kind of unity, and so they now wanted to form their own independent nations so that they could be free from any foreign invasion, any foreign domination. As a result of this, nationalistic movements spread across Europe through the 19th century. With this, we come to an end of our discussion on how Napoleon played a very crucial role in spreading nationalism throughout Europe. Though Napoleon was actually trying to keep these people together in the controlled regions by spreading the ideas of liberty, equality, fraternity as well as nationalist sentiments, all these together backfired on him. These people now started seeing him as a foreign power, as a power who needed to be overthrown in order to have their own independent modern nations. And in this way, Napoleon had actually paved the way for many nationalistic movements to emerge in Europe through the 19th century. Having learnt about this, in our subsequent lesson, we will be focusing on how societies were in Europe before these revolutions and nationalistic movements broke out. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.